This morning we're only going to get to the first one of their personal life, and that is, and we don't sometimes think about how big of a topic this is, we should be praying for our children to maintain a clear conscience. Now, what is a conscience? Let's start in chapter 2 of Romans, okay? If you'd flip over to Romans 2 with me, please. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of this wonderful faculty God gave us called our conscience. Romans 2 describes in verses 14 and 15 exactly what this wonderful reflection of God's image in us is. It says, "For when the Gentiles," Romans 2:14, "who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these, although they, not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and between themselves and their thoughts, accusing or else excusing them." Now that's an amazingly powerful description of our conscience. Our conscience is a warning system. It's a sensor. It's a spiritual part of our being that warns us to pull up before we crash into sin. It warns us when we're headed the wrong direction. It warns us when we're going toward something that's going to cause disaster. It's a warning system God put in. And I think it's fascinating. The news this week. Did you read about the 2 airplanes in Germany? After this disaster, they discovered that one of the planes had switched off the collision warning system. That's not uncommon. That happens over and over again. In fact, about 10 years ago, there was a famous crash of a plane that went full speed into one of the mountains in the Andes Mountains down in South America. I mean, that plane just exactly hit at full power right in the side. And the reason they found was that the sensors, when they de-ice the wings, they always put duct tape over them so they don't spray the stuff into the sensor and ruin it. And they forgot to take the duct tape off the sensor. So the sensor was immobilized. That warning system wasn't there. And so many people go through life with duct tape over their sensors. And part of our prayer is that we pray that our children have clear consciences, that they keep those sensors open and warning them of disaster, of midair collision. So what is our conscience? It's a system that God has designed. It's an automatic warning system. It tells us pull up. Our conscience is part of our personhood. It's part of being made in God's image. It's that innate ability to sense right and wrong. And everyone, even the most uncivilized pagan, has a conscience. That's what it says right here in chapter 2 of Romans. But how do we pray about that conscience? Well, many ways. But let me start back in the Old Testament. Look at 2 Chronicles with me, because this will help you spot the conscience in the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, 2 Chronicles 34, back there in verse 27, the Old Testament description of the conscience is called the heart. The lev, L-E-B, lev. The heart is the Old Testament word that describes the conscience. And it says in verse 27 of 2 Chronicles 34, "Because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself." There is the conscience at work. The heart, the conscience was tender. The conscience was responsive. So how do we pray for our children? Lord, keep their heart tender and responsive to you. Help them to keep the sensors clear. You know, the conscience is much like skylights. Skylights, if they're clear, bring light in so you can see what you're doing. If they're covered with debris and junk and pile up, the skylight's dim and you can't see and you're stumbling all the time. The conscience is not a revelation. God does not reveal himself through it. It's not God actually speaking. It's part of us as humans. It is fallible. It is injurable. It is possible for it to be diminished. In fact, we're going to see it can be injured. It can be calloused. It can even be seared and incapable of operation. So what should we pray? Verse 27 of 2 Chronicles 34. And if you're a Bible marker, it's a great verse to write down. Lord, keep their heart tender. Keep them humble before you. Help them to have their sensors on. And they say, God, I don't want to crash into any mountain that will cause me not to glorify you. I will not want to get into a system where I am going to not be able to magnify you with my life and compromise. Look at the book of Psalms. Keep going to the right. 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms. the 7th Psalm, and the 10th verse. Here's another description of our conscience, Psalm 7 and verse 10. My defense is of God who saves the upright in heart. That's another description for those with a pure conscience, those who keep the skylights clear. God says, if you do that, and another metaphor for the conscience is it's much like the nerves on our fingers. We can feel things. We can feel if something is hot, if something is rough, if something is sharp, if something is just not like it should be. We can feel it. But did you know if you develop calluses on your fingertips, you can't feel? Or if you burn and damage the tissue, then you can't feel anything at all. And that's what the conscience is like. It is a very sensitive warning system. And it says it operates, look at Psalm 7 and verse 10, those who have a pure conscience are those who are upright in heart. God defends them. Why? Because they're keeping sensitive and tender and pure in their response to Him. And so that's something we should pray for our children, that they be upright in heart, that they have a pure conscience. Psalm 51, we touched on this last week. Turn over there with me if you would. Psalm 51 and verse 10. Create in me a clean heart. Sometimes our conscience gets defiled. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. Sometimes we are not careful to maintain that pure and clean conscience, and so we should pray, by the way, for ourselves as well as to them, to have a clean heart, a clean conscience. That is something that we should be asking God for. One of the best ways, this is in Psalm 139. Here's another verse to have in your arsenal of prayers. Psalm 139, the last two verses. And this is what it says. This is David saying, "Search me, God. Search me." We live out in the country in Broken Arrow. We live right on the edge of this, I call it a river, but he laughs, it is a river. It has beavers in it and all kinds of flora and fauna and vermin and everything else. And they crawl into our yard, and we saw this possum slinking in, looked kind of sickly, and wouldn't you know, it chose to die underneath our deck. Little monster. Well, you know what? Pretty soon, what happens after something dies? You could smell it. And so I had to search out and find out where the smell came from, and I had to extricate that. That's what it's like. David is saying that. He says, search out anything that's defiling, that's clouding and smelling up your relation. Search me, O God. Know my heart. Try me. Find out what I'm anxious about. You see, our conscience begs us to do what is right. Our conscience hinders us from doing what we believe is wrong. That's what God put it in for. And if we follow our conscience and obey what God says, it praises and brings us tranquility and self-confidence. But if we go against it, our conscience will condemn us. It triggers feelings of disgrace and torment and penitence and dismay and apprehension. So look what he's saying. Verse 23, know my anxieties. Lord, my conscience is troubling me. What possum has snuck in under the deck of my life and stinking up this relationship? Because I want to get rid of it. Man, I put that shovel there and pulled that corpse out and trundled it off and put it back where it came from, back in the river. Go back where you came from, you monster. That's what David said. He says, create a clean heart. Know me. Verse 24, see if there's any wicked way. And then lead me in the way everlasting. Lord, I want to maintain a clear conscience. That was Paul's constant prayer. He constantly was asking the Lord. In fact, look at the book of Acts, chapter 24 and verse 16. Here is a powerful, by the way, Paul talks about the conscience 23 of the 30 times it's mentioned in the New Testament. But Acts 24 is one of the great passages as Paul gives his testimony of how he was able to serve the Lord so greatly. And he said this in Acts 24:16. I myself always strive. He says, I am keeping the sensors untaped. I'm keeping the skylights open. I'm not damaging my sensitivity. I want a conscience without offense toward God and toward man. He said, I want to be a man of integrity. I want to be responsive to your word.